You know what messes with your head more than failure? Doing everything right and still falling behind. Not because you were lazy, not because you didn't try, but because the rules changed while you were following them. That's the quiet psychological crisis of millennials, people born between 1981 and 1996, an entire generation raised on promises that expired the moment they tried to cash them in. And no, this isn't about avocado toast or canceling culture. This is about what happens to the human mind when the future it was trained for never arrives. Let me start with a scene. It's 11:47 p.m. A 34-year-old is sitting alone in their car outside their apartment. Not because they're lost, but because going inside feels heavier than staying still. Their phone lights up. A bank app. A student loan reminder. A rent payment notification. They did everything they were told to do. They studied. They graduated. They worked. They stayed responsible. And yet somehow they're still behind. That moment, that quiet late-night pause, is where millennial psychology lives. Millennials were raised during the peak of the self-esteem movement. Parents, teachers, and experts genuinely believed confidence was the key to success. So they said things like, "You're special. You can be anything. You matter just for being you." Those weren't lies. They were hopes. But here's the psychological problem no one saw coming. Self-esteem without stability creates fragility, not strength. And millennials became the first generation to test that at scale. Then came adulthood. Right on schedule, millennials stepped into the real world. Just as the 2008 financial crisis tore the floor out from under it. Jobs vanished. Housing spiked. College degrees turned into lifelong debt contracts. According to the Pew Research Center, millennials became the first generation in modern American history expected to be worse off financially than their parents. That's not just an economic statistic. That's a psychological earthquake. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, when what you were taught to expect violently conflicts with reality. But for millennials, it wasn't temporary. It was permanent. They were told, effort equals outcome. Reality said, effort equals survival. That mismatch rewires how the brain relates to hope, motivation, and identity. Psychologist Jean Twenge, author of Generation Me, found something unsettling. Millennials score higher on narcissism and higher on anxiety and depression than previous generations. At first glance, that sounds contradictory. How can a generation feel special and worthless at the same time? But psychologically, it makes perfect sense. When you're taught you're exceptional but the world treats you as replaceable, your self-worth has nowhere stable to land. So it oscillates. Confidence on the outside. Self-doubt underneath. A trauma response with a resume. Now add social media. Millennials weren't raised with it as children, they met it while becoming adults. Facebook launched in 2004. Instagram in 2010. Which means millennials didn't just live their lives. They performed them. Psychologist Tim Kasser's research shows that when people base their worth on external validation, likes, success signals, visibility, mental health declines sharply. And social media turns life into a 24/7 referendum. You're not just living. You're being silently evaluated. Every post asks, am I doing well enough yet? And the answer is almost always, not quite. Then there's the delayed milestones. Marriage. Home ownership. Children. Surveys consistently show millennials want these things. But wages stagnated. Housing outpaced income. Debt exploded. So adulthood became something you prepare for, without ever arriving. Psychologists call the resulting stress allostatic load, the body's cost of being in a constant state of readiness for a future event that never happens. Like holding your breath for years. Your nervous system doesn't relax. It doesn't feel safe. It just waits. This is why so many millennials describe life as feeling like a loading screen. Always buffering. Never starting. And here where it gets even deeper. Millennials didn't just lose money. They lost trust. They were sold a social contract. Study hard. Play by the rules. climb steadily upward. Instead, they found degrees costing 10x more than before, entry-level jobs demanding 5 years experience, a gig economy dressed up as freedom, layoffs framed as restructuring. Psychologists call this schema disruption when your core belief about how the world works collapses. And when that happens at a generational level, you don't get rebellion. You get cynical idealism. Millennials still believe things should be fair. They just no longer believe they will be. This also explains job hopping. Millennials aren't disloyal. They're adaptive. Pensions disappeared. Loyalty stopped being rewarded. Stability became an illusion. Why commit to institutions that don't commit back? That's not an entitlement. That's pattern recognition. And let's talk about something rarely said out loud. Millennials are one of the most educated, most diverse, and most information-literate generations in history. They grew up online, seeing contradictions, propaganda, and multiple truths simultaneously. That creates skepticism. But skepticism inside systems that demand obedience looks like being difficult. Millennials didn't question authority because they're spoiled. They questioned it because the internet showed them how often authority lies. Here's the paradox. Millennials are the first generation to openly talk about mental health, therapy, anxiety, and trauma. That's progress. But they're doing it while living in objectively harsher conditions. Historic debt, unstable work, housing scarcity, climate anxiety. So they're more self-aware and more overwhelmed. Insight without power is exhausting. And the future. Millennials are watching the planet warm, systems strain, and institutions stall while being told they're responsible for fixing it without the resources to do so. That creates existential stress, a sense of responsibility without control. A uniquely modern burden. So when people ask, why are millennials so anxious? Why can't they just settle down? Why don't they buy houses? The psychology is actually very simple. They were trained for a world that no longer exists, and then blamed for noticing. But here, the reframe most people miss. Millennials aren't broken. They are overadapted. They learned flexibility because stability vanished. They learned skepticism because promises failed. They learned self-reflection because certainty collapsed. History often misunderstands generations right before it needs them most. And if you're a millennial watching this, feeling behind, tired, or quietly disappointed, that feeling isn't a weakness. It's evidence that your nervous system is responding exactly as it should to prolonged uncertainty. If this made you feel seen, not judged, not dismissed, hit like. If you want more psychology that actually respects your experience, subscribe. And if you're still waiting for your life to start, you're not late. You were navigating a maze that kept moving the walls. You're not failing. You're adapting. And that story isn't over yet.